Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome back to our Unity 3D platformer tutorial series. Now, we've got our player dying and respawning a couple of seconds later back at the start position, but we want to make this little death sequence look a little bit better. So when our player dies, at the moment they just disappear out of the world and then they reappear back over here wherever they were. So let's make that look a little bit better. First thing we're going to do is add a very simple little particle effect for when our player gets killed. So we're going to take our gold pickup effect that we already have. If we just zoom in on here. I'm going to make sure that this is no longer prefab by going to game object up here and then break prefab instance, because we're going to change this basically so that we can use it in our own way. So I'm going to rename this to be player death effect, and then in our prefabs folder I'm going to drag this into there. So now we have a new effect that we're going to use, and of course at the moment that's still the colors of all the gold bar and everything. We don't want that, so let's just turn on looping while we're making this here, and we can restart the effect. I'm going to change our start colors to a red color, and well, that's a bright red, so let's make this one a little bit of a darker red and a little bit closer to white as well. So we get a little bit of variation in our little effect there, and we'll make the start size a bit bigger too. Actually, we'll randomize the start size a bit. Random between two constants between 0.5 and 0.1. So we get a bunch of different kind of interesting looking little particles flying around for us. And very straightforward. You can obviously mess around with that and see what kind of particles you want to do, but for our purposes that's totally fine. I will apply that change there. So we need to, whenever our player gets killed, make that effect happen within the world. So we'll go back into our health manager script, and we need a reference, of course, to that game object. So public game object that we'll call death effect. And much like we did with our gold pickup, it isn't the gold pickup, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. Yes, when we instantiated the pickup effect at transformed opposition, we're going to do something very similar in our health manager. So as soon as the respawn code starts, as soon as our player is deactivated, then we want to go instantiate our death effect. But the place we want to instantiate isn't just transform, it is the player's transform. So the player.transform.position. And let's set it at the player.transform.rotation, although that shouldn't really matter too much for our kind of particle effect that we're using. So let's save this and go back into Unity and test this out. Let it compile for a second. Oh, and then on our death effect, of course, I just realized that we need to turn off looping. So apply that change again. And on our health manager script, we're going to drop the player death effect into there. Then we press play. And we can run, bang, and our player explodes. Perfect. Exactly what we wanted to do. So we can see now our player is respawning back to their start position, which looks a little bit nicer. But one other thing we can do is when our player dies, we want our player to kind of fade out from the world. Or not even our player, our screen to fade out, kind of fade to black, and then we reset our player then, and then the screen fades back in so that we can see what's going on. So let's do this. We're going to set up on our canvas, which is where we have our little gold text of how much gold we've collected already. I'm actually going to rename this canvas to UI so that it just makes a little bit more sense for us. And then in here, we have a text already. So what we're going to do is click on UI and then right click and go to UI and then image. So we're going to add a new UI image. So let's make sure that we can see this here. So we click on image over here and we'll zoom back out. Now you can see within Unity we got this huge big UI stuff. So when we want to be able to interact with this, because it's like a flat plane that we're interacting with, if we switch to just 2D mode, it'll just flatten everything out so we can see everything perfectly the way we want to. Now this big image, we want to basically just make this a black image. So we'll go to our color here, make it as black as we can. and then we're going to scale this up. So we're going to scale that out to there, and then this one out here. And we want to make it bigger than the screen size, which is our little white box that we have here. And then we want to make sure that for people using different aspect ratios on their screen and stuff like that, we want to make sure this black box will cover them no matter what. So we go over to where we have the pivot point selection here, or the anchor, sorry, selection here. We can set it using this one down here, which is our stretch one. So this means it'll stretch out based on wherever it is relative to the four corners of the screen. So basically, as much as the screen size will change, this little black box will change with it. So just as an example of that, if we change the aspect ratio here, you can see if we change it to 5:4, the black box shrinks. If we change it to 16:10, it stretches out, 16:9. All these different sizes, the box will shrink depending on the size of the screen. Let's go back to our free aspect. The next thing we want to do is, like we said, we want to use this to fade the screen in and out. And how we can make this black box fade in and out is if we go to our color bar here and we go to the alpha value, which is the A. If we drag this down, you can see it goes invisible, and drag it back up, it becomes visible again. So we want it by default to be invisible, so we can't see it within the world. And then when the player dies, we'll make it go all the way back up to full, and then fade back out to invisible again. So let's, just in our normal view here, let's go back to focusing on the player, switch back to 3D mode. And we'll just save the changes we currently have, just in case anything crazy happens with Unity. You always want to make sure you're regularly saving whatever work you're doing. So back in our Health Manager, we're obviously going to need a reference to that UI image that we just created. And as we did in our Game Manager script, where we controlled adding text to the text UI object, we need to access the UI stuff within Unity. So we need to use unityengine.ui. So back in Health Manager, up the very top, we say using unityengine.ui. And then we're going to create a reference to the image that we just made. So we're going to create a public image that we'll just call black screen. And then we have two values that we want to use for when we're fading in and out. We're going to have, well, not two values, but two booleans basically that we're going to use. We're going to use actually we won't make it public, we'll make it private. Private bool that we'll call is fade to black. And then private bool is fade from black. So these will basically be our way of saying, okay, when we're fading to black, use this one. When we're fading back up from black, use this one. And of course, one other thing we're going to need is a public float telling us how fast we want to fade. So we're just going to call that our public float fade speed. So let's go back down here. Basically what we want to do is when we start respawning, so we deactivate the player and instantiate the effect. Then we want to do straight away is actually we probably don't want to do it straight away. We'll add a little bit of a pause here. So we're going to add another little counter. So we have our respawn length, and then we'll also have a public float wait for fade. So back down here in our respawn code routine, we're going to add another yield return new wait for seconds. So in here, actually, you probably should have put these the other way around. I just realized we'll put respawn length in this first one. And then we'll put another one here called wait for fade. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to deactivate the player, instantiate his little dead effect. Then we're going to wait for our respawn time. And we're going to start our fade out. So we're going to say is fade to black equals true. Then we're going to wait for our fade. And once we're finished waiting for the fade, we're going to say is fade from black equals false. And then in our update loop, we're going to add controls. We're going to basically make our color fade in and fade out. Now, you might be asking, oh, why don't we use a coroutine for controlling our fade into black and our fading from black? We could just create a new coroutine and call that and make it time down our fade to black, but that won't really work for us because we want to make it gradually, smoothly happen. If we were to use a coroutine, it would just go start off at your default color. We could make it wait for 1 second and then go to our black color, but we couldn't gradually make it happen. So we want to, this is a case where although we want something to happen over time, we want to happen within our update loop rather than happening in its own little coroutine. So if we go back up to our update loop here, we're going to just move down a little bit and we're just going to say if is fade to black. So if we want our black screen image to start fading into the black color, basically all we have to do is, as we looked at back here on our image, which actually we should rename to black screen because just having it called image isn't really very descriptive. We should actually change the get text here as well to also say gold text just to be a bit more descriptive. But as we know on our black screen, we can just increase the alpha value all the way up to the top to make it black and then decrease it all the way back down to the bottom to make it completely see-through and invisible again. Now you might notice that our alpha value here goes up to 255. That's how it's represented here in the browser in Unity. However, within code within Unity, we're actually dealing with a number between 0 at the bottom and 1 at the top. And to basically get any number in between, you would divide by 256. But what we do is just say, hey, we only need to worry about getting to the bottom or the top. So we can just say, at the bottom, we should be 0. At the top, we should be 1. Let's go back to leaving it on 0. And we go back in here. And then we know when we want to fade to black, basically we want to set our alpha value to be 1. So we can just say our black screen dot color, set that to be equal to a new color that has it has the same R, G, and B values. So the same here, the same red, green, and blue values. So we'll say our new color is black screen dot color dot R, black screen dot color dot G, and black screen dot color dot B. So all those colors are the exact same. And then finally we have the alpha value over here. And what we want to do with the alpha value is use matf dot move towards. So using mats, we want to move towards a value. So this is our current value is whatever our black screen dot color dot A is. We want to go towards 1, like we said. And how fast we want to get there is our fade speed that we set up here. So fade speed multiplied by time.delta time, like that. And at the end, we've got 2 brackets because we just opened a new one here. And of course, the main one over here. And semicolon at the end. And then all we're doing next is saying, okay, so that's all fine and dandy. We're having it fade to black because we want to get it towards 1. And then we want to do a little check here to say if our black screen dot color, not collider, black screen dot color dot A, so if the alpha color already equals 1, well then in that situation is fade to black equals false. So basically we're saying once we get our black screen color to get to 1, then at that point we don't need to fade to black anymore, so we can stop doing that. And the reason we do that is because if we have this running and our screen is trying to fade to black, but we also want to start up the fading from black, so we're wanting to make it go back towards see-through. If this is still active, then those 2 bits of code will be trying to cancel each other out. So we'll basically have it going black, trying to go back to see-through, trying to go back to black, trying to go back to see-through, and they'll both keep fighting each other forever and ever. So what we want to do is say, okay, as soon as our color gets to 1, then fade to black is false. The next thing we want to do is do the opposite for our fade from black. So we can basically take the exact same bits of code, just copy it, paste it down here, and instead of is fade to black, we'll use is fade from black, and the same here is fade from black. We just want to make sure we change that. And over here, instead of going towards 1, we're going to go towards 0. So we're taking our black screen color back to being invisible. And here we're doing a check and see if we are equal to 0, then we no longer need to be fading from black. Okay, so we can see in our code routine here now that that should all work for us. If we go back into Unity, we need to, of course, fix up those variables we just created. So our black screen will drag into there. Fade speed, we'll set this at 2. And then wait for fade, we'll just wait for 1 second. So we'll play. And as soon as we run into these little cactuses, bang, we die. Then we fade to black. And we're not fading back from black for some reason. Hold on, what's going on here? Let's go back in here. Oh, because we set is fade from black to be false. That should be true, of course. Save this, go back into here. Press play. Try this again. We run into there. We fade to black, and then we fade back out. So perfect. That works absolutely nicely for us. That our player is disappearing, and we come back, and it looks a little bit more sensible. Now, of course, because that is an image that we just put up on the screen up there, that's a completely black image. You could have an image saying, "Oh no, you died," and make it stay up there for like a few seconds. You know what I mean? Like, we could have, if I just stop this running for a second, we could have our wait for fade be like 4 seconds. And we could have our player dies, it fades out. You could have something on the screen here saying, "Oh no, you died," or something like that. And then it fades back in, and you can run around, jumping around like a maniac to your heart's content all over again. Now, there's one little bug that would pop up with this at the moment. It might not be very obvious just yet, but I just stopped this running. So if I put our fade speed to say 0.5, so our fade is very slow, and our wait for fade also to 0.5, so our wait for fade is very fast. We can play, and we should start fading. So you can see we started fading, so now our screen is a little bit darker, but we never unfaded. And if you don't know what's going on here, basically what's happening is, if I just stop this for a second, go back in here. What's happening is we're starting our fade to black. It becomes true. It's fading very, very slowly. Then we're waiting for however long our fade is, and we're starting our fade from black immediately. So basically what's happening then is our fade to black has started, but it never gets to being 1F. So basically this whole object won't stop going. Our fade to black, or sorry, our fade from black is now going as well, trying to get towards 0. But both of these guys are both constantly running. So then what happens every single frame is this guy tries to increase the alpha color by one tiny little bit, and this guy takes away the alpha color by the exact same tiny bit, so our screen just stays at whatever darkness level it is. So we want to add one little extra thing in here to say, if we're going to start fading from black, then no matter what, our is fade to black should be equal to false. So no matter how dark it's gotten, if it hasn't had time to fade out completely, no matter what, we'll set our is fade to black to be false. So now if we play and do the exact same thing, we'll see our screen just kind of darken for a second and then get bright again. There we go. We see it works nicely for us. Of course, you don't really want to have that situation. Ideally, you always want your screen would go completely dark. Even if it's just for a brief second, like it was just there, our screen is completely dark within the world. So perfect. There you go. That's how we can respawn our player and how we can make everything just look a little bit more sensible. So now that we can respawn our player within the world, something else we need to take a look at is adding checkpoints for our player to be able to respawn to different places depending on how much progress we've made in the levels.